It was a quiet afternoon at a small roadside diner just outside of Dallas, Texas. The kind of place where time seemed to slow, where the scent of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon clung to the air, wrapping itself around the cracked leather booths and faded checkered floors. The old bell above the door gave a tired chime as a man stepped inside, his boots scuffing softly against the floor. Clint Eastwood wasn't here to be noticed. He never was. Dressed in a simple brown jacket and a well-worn hat pulled low over his eyes, he moved with the unassuming ease of a man who had long since grown accustomed to the weight of the world on his shoulders. But today, he wasn't carrying the burdens of Hollywood, past regrets, or the ghosts that sometimes visited him in the quiet hours of the night. Today, he just wanted a damn cup of coffee. Sliding into a corner booth, Clint positioned himself with his back to the room, out of habit more than necessity. He wasn't looking for trouble. Trouble had a way of finding him, but all he wanted now was a quiet meal, away from the eyes of the world. A waitress approached his table, her uniform crisp, her smile warm. The name tag pinned to her shirt read Kesha. She looked young, maybe in her early 20s, but there was something about her that seemed older. The kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with a long shift. The kind of weariness that settled into the bones. "Welcome to Betty's Diner, sir. Can I start you off with some coffee?" she asked, her voice gentle yet practiced, the way someone speaks when kindness is second nature. Clint nodded, his sharp eyes taking her in. There was no flicker of recognition, no excitement, no suppressed gasp. She had no idea who he was, and that suited him just fine. As she poured his coffee, Clint's gaze caught something, just for a moment, a piece of paper peeking out of her apron pocket, bearing the unmistakable letterhead of a hospital. Then he noticed something else. Her hands trembled, just slightly, as she set down the coffee cup. "Long day?" he asked, his voice rough but not unkind. Kesha let out a small breath. "Always," she said with a tired chuckle before straightening. "You ready to order?" Clint hesitated. Something about her posture, the way she carried herself, felt off. But he let it go. For now. As Clint sipped his coffee, he watched Kesha move around the diner. She worked with precision, her steps light but efficient, her patience endless. She refilled drinks before they were empty, took extra care with the elderly couple at the corner booth, and even took a moment to calm a crying child by offering him a sugar packet to play with. But there were cracks in her armor. Every so often, between serving customers, she'd pull out her phone, glance at the screen, then tuck it away with a deeper frown. And when she thought no one was looking, her practiced smile would slip, revealing the weight she carried beneath it. Then it happened. As she reached into her apron, a small pill bottle tumbled out, hitting the floor with a soft clatter. She snatched it up quickly, but Clint had already seen it. He had spent a lifetime learning how to read people, and right now he was reading fear. Not for herself, but for someone else. The lunch rush died down, and Clint watched as Kesha stepped into a quiet corner, her back to the kitchen. She pulled out her phone again, her voice hushed but urgent. "Yes, doctor. Williams, I understand. No, I'll have the payment by the end of the week. I know it's expensive, but she's my mama." Her voice hitched slightly, but she quickly swallowed it down. Wiping at her eyes, she straightened and returned to her tables, though her hands shook a little more now. A moment later, the diner's owner, a kind-looking older woman with silver hair, approached Kesha with a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Baby girl, why don't you take a break?" "I'm fine, Miss Betty," Kesha insisted. "Mama's treatment isn't going to pay for itself." But just as she turned back to her tables, the envelope tucked into her apron slipped, sending a stack of medical bills scattering onto the floor. One slid all the way to Clint's boot, and as he picked it up, he saw the number, the kind of amount that no waitress working double shifts could ever afford. But it wasn't the total that stopped him cold. It was the diagnosis at the top of the page. Stage 3 cancer. Clint Eastwood took the last sip of his coffee, his sharp eyes fixed on the crumpled bill in his hand. The numbers blurred together as he stared at them, but the message was clear. This wasn't just a matter of money. This was the weight of someone's life, the evidence of an ongoing battle fought in silence. Some people shaped their own path, while others were forced to accept what life handed them. Kesha was caught somewhere in between. She had the potential for more, yet the world had given her nothing but obstacles. And still, she fought. Outside, the sunset bathed the town in a deep orange glow, casting long shadows across the worn pavement. The diner, once buzzing with the day's commotion, had begun to quiet down. Clint observed Keisha as she moved between tables, refilling cups and clearing plates. There was a tired grace to her, an unshakable determination that reminded him of the characters he had played on screen. But this wasn't a movie. This was real. She approached his table again, a polite yet distant smile on her face. "Would you like a refill, sir?" she asked, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone used to serving others. Clint shook his head, gesturing toward his untouched glass of water. "No thanks. But I do have a question for you, if you don't mind." Kesha hesitated for a moment, adjusting her apron. "Sure," she said cautiously. He met her eyes, his voice steady but gentle. "You're fighting for your mother, aren't you?" Her expression flickered, her shoulders tensing slightly. It was clear she had been asked about her situation before, but this time felt different. Clint wasn't just making conversation. He wanted to understand. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "She sacrificed everything for me. Now it's my turn." Clint nodded, recognizing the weight behind her words. In his lifetime, he had met warriors of all kinds, on screen and off. Some fought with guns, some with words, and some, like Kesha, fought with sheer resilience. "How much do you need?" he asked, straightforward as ever. Kesha blinked in surprise, shaking her head almost instinctively. "Sir, I can't. This is my burden. But thank you." Clint studied her for a moment before leaning back in his seat. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Strong, stubborn, and unwilling to accept help. But here's the thing. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone lend a hand." Kesha looked down, struggling with the weight of his words. She had spent so long carrying her problems alone that the idea of sharing the burden felt foreign, almost impossible. But Clint wasn't done yet. Clint reached into the pocket of his jacket, pulling out a small notepad and a pen. As Kesha stood there, uncertain of what to say, he began scribbling something down. "Life has a way of coming full circle," he muttered as he finished writing. He folded the paper neatly, slipped it into an envelope, and placed it face down on the table. Then he looked up at her with that same quiet authority that had defined him for decades. "One day you're going to change someone's life. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But when that day comes, I hope you'll remember this moment." Kesha hesitated, then slowly reached for the envelope. Her fingers trembled as she turned it over and pulled out the paper inside. Her breath caught in her throat. $200,000, and beneath it, a handwritten note. "You didn't know me as Clint Eastwood, but I knew you. This is for your mother and for your future. When your time comes, pay it forward." Kesha's eyes filled with tears. Her entire world had just shifted in an instant. She wanted to say something, to thank him, to tell him how much this meant, but the words wouldn't come. By the time she looked up, Clint was already on his feet, leaving a few crumpled bills for his coffee. He gave her one last nod before pushing open the door and stepping out into the cool evening air. Kesha clutched the note to her chest, overwhelmed by a feeling she hadn't known in a long time. Hope. Clint Eastwood had just walked out of her life, but what he left behind was far greater than money. He had changed it forever.